famous Vaishnav poets whose prayers we sing every day here in the temple. In fact, we're going to sing part of his prayers at 7:30. His name is Jayadev Goswami. Anyone heard of Jayadev Goswami? Yes. Who here has heard of Jayadev Goswami? Put your hand up. One. You've heard of Jayadev Goswami. Okay, quite a few. Okay, well, brace yourself because it's going to be a very informative and very enriching class today. But before we start the class, we'll sing our Jai Radha Madhava prayers. Okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Pira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Jaya Jagannath Jagannath Baladev Jaya Jaya Subhadrama Jaya Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe Jaya Radhe Jaya Radhe Jaya Radhe Jaya Shri Radhe Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Okay. Before we start any class, generally in Vedic tradition, we invoke the blessings of the Lord by chanting Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya 3 times. So I request you to please follow me. And please bless me that I can give proper etiquette and justice to these very rich pastimes of Srila Jayadeva Goswami. So Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. Thank you everybody for coming to the Sunday Feast class. So today we are speaking. Last week we also had a very special festival in the temple. Anybody knows what the festival was? Who was here last Sunday? Okay, so what happens in the Snan Yatra? Yes? And then, yeah, please go on. And when do we take darshan of him again? What happens at the end of the 2 weeks? Yes, and then what is the other special event that happens after 15 days? Yes, Jagannath Rath Yatra. So today, the pastime is about Jayadeva Goswami, who is the jewel amongst all Vaishnava poets and very, very dear to Lord Jagannath. You will find there are various stages in his Leela, during his life when Lord Jagannath directly interferes. So it's a pastime of one of Lord Jagannath's very, very close and dear devotees. Okay. Again, how many of you here have heard of Jayadeva Goswami? Even if you've heard of him, you can raise your hands. Okay, a few. How many here like poetry? That's it. How many of you here like music? Okay. And I'll tell you why I asked the question towards the end of the class. So, okay. Now coming back to Jayadeva Goswami. Very exalted devotee. He was born, there are different historical accounts to the exact date, but he was born either in the 11th or the 12th century in Bengal, very close to Navadvip or Mayapur. He was born in a place called Kendu Bilva, that was the name of the village, Kendu Bilva, in the Birbhum district. Anybody here who's from Bengal? Oh, you're from Bengal. Anybody else? Do you know have you heard of Birbhum district? Okay, it's near Mayapur. Have you heard of Champahati? No? Yeah. You've been to Mayapur obviously. Okay. Well, you'll have a few places to go to the next time you go back home after this class. And his mother's name was Rama Devi. His father's name was Bhojadev, Jayadeva Goswami's. He had, now with all these famous Vaishnavas, with the Goswamis, they have their own deities who we all worship today. With, for example, Radha Gopinath, the original deities of Radha Gopinath are the Ishtadev or the deities of Madhu Pandit. Similarly, the deities of Radha Govinda, for example, which are in Jaipur, the replica deities in Vrindavan, they are the original deities of Srila Rupa Goswami. Then in Mayapur, how many of you here have been to Mayapur? Oh, many of you need to book your tickets to India. Okay, if you go to the ISKCON temple in Mayapur, what are the name of the principal deities? What are the name of the principal deities in the Chandradeva Mandir in Mayapur? Loudly. Yes, Sri Radha Madhav. So Sri Radha Madhav are the principal deities in Mayapur. And the original Radha Madhav deities were worshipped by Jayadev Goswami. They were his Ishtadeva deities. And he received these deities at the ripe old age of 5 or 6. So when he was a 5 or 6-year-old boy, he found these deities. There are very little historical accounts of how he found the deities. But he started worshipping the deities, the original deities of Sri Sri Radha Madhav, when he was 5 or 6 years old, roughly 1,000 years ago or more. Now, and he worshipped these deities throughout his life. Now, the Lord makes, whenever the devotee has a desire, the Lord makes a special effort to fulfill the desires. Now, we also spoke about that Jayadev Goswami was very famous for his poetry. And the principal poems that he wrote, one of you mentioned it also, what are they called? The principal book? Gita Govinda. Yes, Gita Govinda. Very famous book of poems. In fact, the Indian government in 2009 released a commemorative set of stamps to actually honor Jayadev Goswami and his work of the Gita Govinda. Now, the Gita Govinda is a big collection of poems, very esoteric poems. We recite one small portion of the Gita Govinda. These stamps, they represent the Das Avatar Stotra. Everybody knows the Das Avatar, right? The 10 principal incarnations of Krishna or Lord Vishnu. So, the glorification of these 10 avatars is Das Avatar. And we particularly chant, at 7:30 you're going to chant the prayer again. Every day you're chanting. If you come to an ISKCON temple or at home, generally every day you're chanting a part of the Gita Govinda. Anybody knows which? Yes, in Narsimha Arti, where you chant, Tava Kara Kamala Vare Nakam Abdyuta Shinga Dalita Hiranyakashipu Avdyuta Singha, and the other portion, Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa, Jai Jagadisha Hare, Jaya Jagadisha Hare, Jaya Jagadisha Hare. Narsimhadev Bhagwan ki. So this portion, this is all a part of the Dasavatar Stotra, which is a part of the Gita Govinda. So although we don't know about the Gita Govinda, but we chant a portion of it practically every day. And in the Gita Govinda itself, when he wrote the book, Jayadev Goswami, actually the Gita Govinda has 2 authors. Did you know who the second author was? It's co-authored.
Krishna himself came and wrote it down one word.
Maybe. Okay. Yeah. So we'll come to that story, but very good, Prabhu. So now when you read the Gita Govinda, at the introduction of the Gita Govinda itself, Jayadev Goswami writes, he introduces himself. And he introduces himself by saying, "He who appeared in the village of Kenduvilva just as the moon rises from the ocean has collected Sri Krishna's expressions of lamentation. That Jayadev is humbly narrating this song." The Gita Govinda also is a very advanced book. It's a very advanced state of poetry. It particularly deals with Krishna's Madhurya Rasa or his pastimes with the gopis. So it is actually meant for very, very advanced devotees. In fact, he himself says, Jayadev Goswami writes, when you start to read the Gita Govinda, he writes that there are 3 conditions which you should fulfill, only then you will enjoy reading the Gita Govinda, or you will understand it. And he says there are three particular conditions. If you meet these 3 conditions, then you should go ahead and read Gita Govinda. What are the 3 conditions? So he writes, so condition number 1, he says, if your heart yearns for remembrance of Sri Hari, which bestows all happiness, number 1. Number 2, if you are hankering to contemplate upon Sri Hari with intense affection, that's number 2. And number 3, and if you are overwhelmed with curiosity to know about Sri Hari's skill in his Madhurya Rasa and his amorous pastimes, then by all means read this book. Okay, so A is if your heart yearns for remembrance of Sri Hari always, which bestows all happiness. So if you want to be happy, this is the way to be happy, always thinking of Krishna. If you are hankering to contemplate upon Sri Hari with intense affection, and if you are overwhelmed with curiosity to know about Krishna's Madhurya Rasa and his amorous pastimes, then by all means read this book. Then he says, you may find this poetry very sweet and pleasing, But if you do not nurture these three desires, then this moving and lyrical literature is not for you. Only if your heart is full of intense eagerness to fathom Sri Hari's loved alliance will you be able to appreciate my beautiful and inspiring poetry. And then there was okay, so it seems very advanced, it seems very far-fetched for all of us, the three conditions. But then, like the old Asian philosopher Confucius said that the hardest journey begins with the first step. So you should take those steps by constantly remembering Krishna. How can you constantly remember Krishna? The simplest way. Yeah. So please, how many of you are chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra? Okay. Well, the others also, this is another motivation. Please start chanting and then you can come and read Gita Govinda. Even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself would discuss the verses of the Gita Govinda, but only with his most confidential associates. He discussed it with two of his associates, Ramananda Rai and Swarup Damodar Prabhu. With these two, he used to discuss the pastimes of Krishna as described in the Gita Govinda. Now, even Prabhupada himself, in his letter to Achyutananda Prabhu in 1952, he actually wrote, when Achyutananda Prabhupada's disciple inquired about why don't we read the Gita Govinda in the ISKCON temple, so Prabhupada told him wrote to him that the songs of Jayadev Goswami are only for Siddha Bhaktas. So he's taking a very humble position, Srila Prabhupada. He himself is a very advanced devotee of the Lord. But he says, but there is one song in the Gita Govinda that glorifies the 10 incarnations. Which one is that? Yes, the Das Avatar Stotra. And he says that is all right. Even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu only discussed this with his most intimate associates and never divulged them in public. So the Das Avatar Stotra you can hear. If you, how many of you use YouTube? That's it. Come on. Either we are not living in 2023 or we're not speaking the truth. How many of you use YouTube? Okay, now we're speaking the truth. So in YouTube also, if you search for Das Avatar Stotra, especially one by Swarup Damodar Prabhu, he's a disciple of Radhanath Maharaj, very beautifully he sung the Das Avatar Stotra. Try, if you go back home, just play Sri Das Avatar Stotra by Swarup Damodar Prabhu on YouTube and just listen. It'll go for 5 or 6 minutes, but very, very beautiful rendition of the Das Avatar Stotra. So anyways, so Prabhupada actually sanctioned, we can listen to the Das Avatar Stotra in the Gita Govinda. Now, when Jayadev Goswami lived in Bengal, he lived during the reign of one king whose name was Lakshman Sena. Now, just like any famous king, when the king wants to be entertained sometimes, you have musicians and poets coming in their assembly and playing. So when the Jayadev Goswami, but was a very, very humble renunciate, he lived in a small hut outside the kingdom in Navadvip, and he started composing the Gita Govinda, which slowly became very popular amongst the locals. So one day when the king had these band of musicians come to play for him, King Lakshman Sen, remember the name, he found that these musicians, while they are singing, they are swaying from one side to the other, and tears are flowing from their eyes. So he paid extra attention to what they were singing, and it was apparently they were glorifying the various incarnations of Krishna and actually singing also about the pastimes of Krishna and his gopis. And as the king heard this music and this poetry, he found that he automatically started crying himself. Automatically all these tears started falling from his eyes. So he immediately went to his minister and said, "This is not any ordinary music that they are playing. This is not ordinary poetry. What is it that they are playing?" So the minister said, "This is the famous work of Jayadev Goswami, who's a devotee of Lord Krishna, and he lives on the outskirts in a small hut." So the king says, "Can I go and can we get Jayadev Goswami here?" And the minister said, No. He's he's a mendicant. He's a humble renunciate. He avoids the materialistic people in this world. He will not come here. So the king says, "Well, I have to meet Sri Jayadev Goswami." And so what was the king's name? So King Lakshman Sen, what he does is he puts on the robes, the normal robes of any common person in his kingdom, on top of his royal dress, and he goes and seeks out where Jayadev Goswami is, and sees Jayadev Goswami and falls in front of him, offers his obeisances and starts making inquiries to him. However, when he just briefly starts talking to Jayadev Goswami, King Lakshman Sen is overcome with emotion, and he tells Jayadev Goswami, look, and he removes his dress and shows himself that, look, I am the king of this region, and I please beg and pray to you, please come and join me in my kingdom. You should reside in my court, my royal court, and we will take care of every need that you have. And Jayadev Goswami says, well, king, all my needs are met here. There is nothing that I need, is what Jayadev Goswami says. So why do I need to come to your kingdom? Do you think the king would agree? But what can he do? He can't force Jayadev Goswami. So what do you think the king will do? What would you do if you were the king? Oh, so what the king does, he's a Rajarishi, King Lakshman Sen. So he tells Jayadev Goswami, I understand, I respect your opinion, and I understand that you don't want to come to my kingdom. But then he begs him correctly, and he says that, look, by the knowledge and association of saintly people like you, only by your knowledge and association will we be benefited. Otherwise, how will common people like me, and royalty especially like me, ever be freed from the vicious cycle of birth and death? Unless we come in contact with and get the association of saintly people like you, how will we be freed from the cycle of birth and death? So he says to Jayadev Goswami, how about we work on a deal? You don't have to live in my kingdom, but just outside my kingdom there is this forest. It's called Champahati. So anyone planning a trip to Mayapur this year? Nobody. 1, 2. Very good. Please make sure you go to Champahati. It's just outside Mayapur. It actually still looks a bit like a forest. It's a lot more developed today, but still it does maintain its rustic element, and you will not be disappointed. So the king, what he does is he convinces Jayadev Goswami that you can live in this small forest called Champahati, just outside of my palace. That way, whenever we want, we can have your association. And he builds him a small temple for his deities. What are the name of the deities? Yes, and he builds a small temple for the deities of Radha Madhav. In this way, at least the king has the association of Jayadev Goswami as he needs. In due course of time, Jayadev Goswami's poetry becomes even more famous all over Bengal and the neighboring regions. And the devotees in Jagannath Puri, they really yearn to get darshan of Jayadev Goswami. So a message goes to the king, from the king of Orissa, whether if you can please send Jayadev Goswami, and we would love to listen from him. So the king requests Jayadev Goswami to go to the neighboring state of Orissa, and Jayadev Goswami respects the king's wishes and goes there. And for a while, he lives as the royal poet in the court of the king of Orissa. Now, okay, so Jayadev Goswami is, so far what we've heard is he's quite poor. He's writing poetry and glorifying the Lord. He's taking his deities of Radha Madhav wherever he goes with him. So what happens next in Jayadev Goswami's life is a real twist in this whole Leela of the pastimes of Jayadev Goswami. When Jayadev Goswami goes to Orissa, he's very close and very dear to Lord Jagannath. There is another Brahmin at that point in time, a Brahmin from South India, whose name is Sudeva, who comes every year to take darshan of Lord Jagannath. And this poor Brahmin Sudeva, him and his wife are childless. So he prays to the Lord that please, if you bless me, O Jagannath, if you can please bless me with a child, I promise you that I will give this child to you. It's a very unique kind of benediction that he is seeking. Please bless me with a child so that this child can serve you, and I promise you I'll hand over this child to you. So in a very short while, his wife becomes pregnant and they have a daughter, and he names the daughter Padmavati. As soon as the daughter hits 12 years of age, Sudeva the Brahmin remembers his promise and goes to Jagannath Puri, and effectively in front of the deities tells Jagannath, here, I had made this promise that if you give me a child, I will hand over the child to you for your service. Here, my daughter is yours from today. As soon as he says that, he must have been such an exalted devotee. Jagannath reveals himself to Padmavati and Sudeva the Brahmin, Padmavati his daughter, and he tells him, Lord Jagannath tells him, the exact words, he says, my dear Sudeva, there is a devotee here called Jayadev Goswami who is very exalted and who is very dear to me. Take your daughter to the forest and ask him to accept her hand in marriage. So basically Jayadev Goswami has moved from the palace to the forest. Now he can't put up with the palace life. He's living in a small forest in Orissa. And Jagannath knows this. So Jagannath is telling Sudeva, take your daughter to the forest and ask him to accept her hand in marriage. You can tell him this is my order. So Sudeva takes his daughter and searches around in the forest, asks people. It's not too difficult to find Jayadev Goswami, because he's very well known because of his poetry. And he goes to the forest and meets Jayadev Goswami. But so this is a very unique thing here is that any of you, you've not gone to Champati. How many of you have gone to Jagannath Puri? How many of you think Jagannath's very, very merciful to his devotees? Even those who haven't gone to Jagannath Puri would experience that. So Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra are characterized as being very, very merciful to their devotees. Every deity has their own special mood. For example, if you pray to Narasimhadev, we tend to pray to him for protection. If you worship Krishna Balram, that has there is a separate mode of worship. The worship of Radha Krishna deities has also a different standard and a separate mode. In Prabhupada's own life, once Prabhupada, when he built the temple in Los Angeles of Sri Sri Rukmani Dwarkadish, he was intensely praying to them. And his secretary asked Prabhupada, what are you praying for so intensely? And Prabhupada's answer was, I'm praying to Sri Sri Rukmani Dwarkadish that they can engage me in the service of Sri Sri Radha Rasbihari in Juhu. So you can see from this Prabhupada statement that Sri Sri Rukmani Dwarkadish has a different mood to Sri Sri Radha Rasbihari. Similarly, in Dallas, Texas, where we have the deities of Sri Sri Radha Kalachandji, Prabhupada was speaking to the pujaris of the deity, and he asked the pujari, what is the mood of the deity? The simple pujari, he said, I don't know, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada started mildly chastising the pujari. You're the pujari, you've been serving the deity for so many years, you should know their mood by now. So this again, Prabhupada is implying that every deity has their own particular mood. When Prabhupada established Sri Sri Radha Gopinath in Sydney in 1971, he had these very famous prayers. Anyone here know what Prabhupada said to them? No? Okay. So when Prabhupada, this is the only deities in the world where he had this prayer. Prabhupada prayed to Sri Sri Radha Gopinath. He found that the standards of worship are very simple. There were not many initiated brahmanas to worship the deities. So Prabhupada told Radha Gopinath, I'm leaving you in the hands of the Malechas. You please guide them on how they can worship you. Malechas basically means meat eaters. So Prabhupada told Radha Gopinath, I'm leaving you in the hands of the Malechas. You please give them the intelligence that they can worship you properly. And here we are, 50 plus years later. Do you think Radha Gopinath has given the intelligence to the community in Sydney to worship them properly? Yes, no? Yes. There you go. So what does that tell you? What is Radha Gopinath's mood then? Yeah, extremely merciful. So if you ever come by a pujari, you can ask them that question as well. I'm sure they'll give you that answer. So that's the mood of Radha Gopinath here. So coming back to Jayadev Goswami and Sudeva, here Jagannath ji has told Sudeva, go to the forest, seek out Jayadev Goswami and make sure your daughter marries him. That is my order. So Sudeva finds Jayadev Goswami and tells him, that please, if you can please marry my daughter. I've just been to Jagannath Puri, and this is the order of the Lord. And Jayadev Goswami is a humble, mendicant devotee of the Lord. He's quite reluctant to get married. He doesn't want to get married. So he initially refuses. He tells Sudeva, I'm not qualified to take care of your daughter. So I cannot accept this proposal. And Sudeva tells him that, this is not an ordinary request I'm coming to you with. This is the order of Lord Jagannath. He has personally requested that you marry my daughter. Please do not violate his command. And Sudeva still is like, Jayadev Goswami still is saying, but look, I have never ever thought of getting married. I'm a mendicant. I have nothing. How can I support your daughter? So Sudeva, what he turns to his daughter Padmavati and tells her, you stay in this forest till he gets married to you and he leaves. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? And Padmavati, the 12, and Padmavati again. So you can, all these characters in this pastime, you should analyze how exalted devotees they must be. So you have character number 1, Jayadev Goswami, who through his poems is melting the hearts of everybody in the kingdom, so much so that the king of Orissa wants him in Orissa instead of Bengal. Character number 2, Sudeva Goswami, who's been blessed by Lord Jagannath with a child, and who the Lord himself is talking to. Character number 3 is Padmavati, just a 12-year-old girl who's left by her father in the forest, but she's fearlessly standing there. So all the 3 of them must be such exalted, devotees. I mean, if you were 12 years old and left in a forest and your parents went away, first of all, they won't do that, but I don't think how many of us would entertain even the thought of that idea. Yeah, so anyways, so here's Jayadev Goswami in face-to-face with Padmavati Devi. And he tries to convince her that, look, I'm not suitable to be your husband. But then Padmavati finally, she says, my dear husband, she's already assumed that he's married her. My dear husband, I have given my heart to you, whether it brings happiness or distress. I have dedicated my life to you. So seeing her determination, Jayadev Goswami realized, okay, this is Jagannath's will. And he agrees to marry her, and they get married. So the lesson from this particular pastime of Jayadev Goswami's life. So what was Jayadev Goswami's original plan? Was his plan to get married? But why does he get married? So it's a desire of Jagannath, right? So the lesson here is that the desire of the Lord, if the Lord has a particular desire, you may have a different desire. Ultimately, you have to put the Lord's desire before you. And okay, but in our lives, if we are lucky, there'll be a few of us who probably in this lifetime, in this body, have Radha Gopinath personally standing in front of us and giving us an order. But then, who is the representation of the deities or Krishna in our lives? Yes, the spiritual master. So just like the desire of the Lord is put before one's desire, if your spiritual master gives you a particular instruction as a particular desire, and you may have a different desire, you should put the spiritual master's order in front of it. That's the lesson to be learned from this pastime. Okay, so in this way, Padmavati and Jayadev Goswami get married, and now they go back to Champahati. So Jayadev Goswami was originally outside in Birban, comes to Champahati, then comes to Orissa. Now they move back to Champahati. And then Jayadev Goswami starts writing the Gita Govinda. And when he's writing the Gita Govinda, there is this particular portion in the Gita Govinda where this thought comes to him that it is almost like Krishna speaking in his heart to write that although Krishna, who is the supreme control, what is the name of Jagannath? Lord of the universe, right? Which means he is the controller of everything in this universe. So he is about to write that Krishna is the supreme controller of everything in this universe, yet he is controlled by the gopis, particularly by one gopi. Which gopi? Radharani. And he has this thought, but it's almost like he challenges himself. If Krishna is the supreme controller, how can he be controlled by the gopis, particularly by Radharani? And how can I write that? And how will the world accept when I write this? So he has what modern writers will call a writer's block. Anybody heard of the term writer's block? No. Anybody here who's a writer or a poet? Need to take up a hobby. So okay. So Jayadev Goswami, or actually Chat GPT does everything for you these days, right? So anyway, Jayadev Goswami, he has a writer's block. He doesn't know what to write. So he's right. Generally, when you say in the Bhagavad Gita or the Bhagavatam, you have these verses, they either come in couplets, which are 2 lines, or in four lines. So he writes 3 out of the 4 lines, the top 2 lines and the last line. But the middle line, where he has to describe how, how do you describe that Krishna is controlled by Radharani? He doesn't know how to, he has a writer's block there, where how do I write this? So he tells Padmavati, his wife, that, they have the Ganges river, Mother Ganga flowing just outside their hut. He's saying, I'm going for a short bath and I'll be back soon. It'll be lunchtime by the time I get back, so I'll honor prasad, whatever prasad you make. So in this way he goes away. So now he goes away, but in a short while he comes back. He comes back, goes to his desk, completes that verse, asks Padmavati Devi, okay, can you feed me lunch now? And she feeds him lunch. She offers the prasadam to the deity of Radha Madhav and feeds him. And he relishes the prasadam. And he tells her, I've eaten too much now, I'm going for a walk. And he disappears. But after he does that, no sooner does he leave, does Jayadev Goswami come back home. And he asks his wife, okay, is lunch ready? And and Padmavati Devi says, well, you just came 5 minutes ago. You just finished having lunch 5 minutes ago. He says, no, I was having a bath in the Ganga. He says, no, you came here a short while ago, you went to your desk, scribbled something and then asked me for prasadam. I gave you prasadam and you left. And as soon as he sees this, he runs back to his desk and he finds there's this freshly imprinted ink, and in the freshly imprinted ink, someone has completed that verse. And that someone who's come pretending to be Jayadev Goswami is who? Any guesses? Yeah, Lord Jagannath Krishna himself. So those four if I have your permission, I'll read those 4 lines and then we'll speak about that line that is written by Krishna himself. So those 4 lines of the Gita Govinda are, in Sanskrit it is, Smara Garala Kandanam Mana Shirasi Mandanam Dehi Pada Pallavam Udaram Jwalati Mai Darunaha Manda Kandan Antaha Haratu Tad Upahita Vikaram. So the translation is, speaking to Srimati Radharani, who is displaying jealous anger towards him, Krishna implored, O beloved, your tender sprout-like feet are the antidote to Cupid's venom. Please place them on my head as my ornament and my glory. The scorching fire of Cupid's poison is unbearable. Please therefore let the touch of your feet quell the torment of my love. So Krishna here is telling Radharani, you please keep your feet on my head. And he's taking the subordinate position. So what does this indicate? That Krishna is taking the subordinate position, and in this verse twice he is requesting Radharani to place her feet on his head. So who's giving whom the blessing? Yeah, and who is controlling Krishna here? And Krishna writes this himself. So the verse that was underlined is the third line, which is Dehi Pada Pallavam Udharam. Dehi Pada Pallavam Udharam. Pad means the feet, Dehi means please give, Pallavam Udharam, please place them on my head. Dehi Pada Pallavam Udharam is written in fresh ink on Jayadev Goswami's manuscript on his desk. And Jayadev Goswami, when he sees this, he just goes into another state of ecstasy, and he's just shocked firstly. And then he just shouts, it's a miracle, it's a miracle. And then he starts screaming that verse, Dehi pada pallavam udharam, that Krishna is asking Radharani to place her feet on his head. So it is proven now that he is conquered or he is controlled by her. And he says this, and then he turns to Padmavati. So he ate prasadam from your hands. So you literally offered prasadam to Lord Jagannath or Krishna. So how exalted are you? So that is, hence, in this way he writes the Gita Govinda, and like Prabhu said, the Gita Govinda is co-authored by Jayadev Goswami and who? Yes, it's written by Jayadev Goswami, co-authored by with Krishna. So it's essentially Jayadev Goswami has written the whole book with one line added, one verse added by Krishna himself. So Jayadev Goswami, so that's why when he comes towards the end of writing the Gita Govinda, he says, I need to complete this work with a very high note. And then he writes a line. So again I'll ask the question which I asked in the start of the class. Who here is interested in poetry? Not many. Okay, more interested in iPhones these days. Who is interested in music? Only these many people. Who is interested in music here? Yeah, okay, so a fair few are interested in music. So the last portion of the Gita Govinda, Jayadev Goswami writes, whatever is delightful in the varieties of music. So again, whatever is delightful in the varieties of music, whatever is graceful in fine strains of poetry. So whatever is delightful in varieties of music, whatever is graceful in fine strains of poetry, and whatever is exquisite in the sweet art of love, let the happy wise persons learn that from the songs of Gita Govinda. So if you're interested in poetry and interested in music, here the Dasavta Stotra, that will be the curtain raiser, and the Gita Govinda is the topmost rendition of all musical performances and poetry. Now again I'll ask, how many of you are planning a trip to Jagannath Puri this year? Okay, I think some of you need to recalibrate your holidays this year, and I'll tell you why. Related to this, especially if you're interested in how the Gita Govinda is performed. So anyway, Srila, now that Gita Govinda is written, Sri Gita Govinda ki, Sri Jayadev Goswami ki, Srimati Padmavati ki. Okay, so throughout Gita Govinda, this is the Gita Govinda describing the Lord and his particular pastimes with the gopis. Again, a recap. Prabhupada said that out of the Gita Govinda is meant for very advanced devotees. Jayadev Goswami himself gives 3 conditions to read the Gita Govinda, but there's a portion of the Gita Govinda, the Dasavtar Stotra, out of which we sing it in our Narsimha prayers every day. And there's the Indian government commemorating Jayadev Goswami's work in their postage stamps. Now after Jayadev Goswami, he completed his Gita Govinda, another special pastime happens. In his dream, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself appears. Now we said Jayadev Goswami was born in the 11th to 12th century, which is roughly 900,000 years ago. How many years back did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu come? So there's roughly 300, 400 years between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu coming and Jayadev Goswami leaving this world. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself appears in his dream, in Jayadev Goswami's dream, and reveals himself as, I'm Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I'm Gaurasundar, Sri Gaurasundar, and I'm going to come in this age of Kali very shortly, and I'll inaugurate this Sankirtan movement. But the other thing that I will also do is that I will also personally relish the words of your Gita Govinda. So here Krishna is helping him write the Gita Govinda, and then Krishna is saying as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that I will relish the works of the Gita Govinda himself. So what a special blessing to Jayadev Goswami. Okay, so and then when the Gita Govinda is complete, the word goes around, and again our friends, the devotees in Jagannath Puri, they like the Gita Govinda so much that they start reciting it in front of Lord Jagannath every day. So every day they are reciting Gita Govinda in Jagannath Puri. In the meanwhile, Jayadev Goswami, he moves around, he goes traveling to different holy dhams, he goes to Vrindavan. And even today, if you go to Radhakund, there's a Pushpa Samadhi of Jayadev Goswami and his wife Padmavati Devi. Now, what was the name of Jayadev Goswami's deity? Yes, so Radha Madhav. Now his deities of Radha Madhav, nobody knows where they are today. There's one school, one branch of devotees that say that Radha Madhav is in Kanaka Vrindavan in Jaipur. There are others who say that no, there was this king called Kirti Chandra, or the king of Mayapur, the king of Burdwan in near Mayapur, who built a temple of Radha Vinod within which the Radha Madhav deities were placed. So those deities, for all practical purposes, nobody really knows where they are, and there are different schools of thought as to where they are. But then many years after the departure of Jayadev Goswami, there's another king in Jagannath Puri. So they are reading Jayadev Goswami's work Gita Govinda every day in Jagannath Puri. There's this king, his name is Purushottam Deva, who's a bit of a poet himself. And he writes his own book and he calls it Abhinav Gita Govinda. And then he goes to, not only does he write the book and he calls it Abhinav Gita Govinda, he goes to the pujaris and he says, actually, in my humble opinion, I think my book is superior to Jayadev Goswami's Gita Govinda. So maybe you should start reading this in front of the Lord every day, and instead of the Gita Govinda. But the pujaris in Jagannath Puri have a very strong view themselves, and they have a very exalted position. So they tell. So now you have a bit of a dispute, right? And the king is directly involved. He's saying, "This is my view." The pujaris are saying, "This is our view." So you need somebody to be the judge. So who do you think the pujaris in Jagannath Puri will have as their judge? Yes. So they say, let Lord Jagannath decide. And what they do is they take a copy of the Gita Govinda by Jayadev Goswami, a copy of the Abhinav Gita Govinda by King Purushottam Dev, and they place it in front of Lord Jagannath. And they close the altar at night. They lock the doors. And then they come back in the morning. And when they come back in the morning, they find that the copy of the Abhinav Gita Govinda, the pages are torn and it's scattered all over the floor, all over the altar. But the copy of Gita Govinda, it was placed on the altar, is now next to the... so Jagannath, the deities, he has a small shoulder, wooden shoulder. It's tucked on his left shoulder, nestled in his shoulder next to his heart. So that's Lord... So Jagannath has made his decision. And they call the king and they say, there's your book and there's the Gita Govinda by Jayadev Goswami. What do you want us to do now? So the king also is a pious person. So he says, yes, it's very true. Jayadev Goswami's Gita Govinda is far superior to my work. So please continue reading that. Then there's another pastime of the Gita Govinda. Roughly 300 years after Jayadev Goswami's departure, around the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when the pujaris were... When Lord Jagannath one day in the afternoon, this is in the recorded in amongst the devotees in Jagannath Puri, that there was a small girl outside of the temple in Jagannath in the courtyard that time. In the afternoon, she was playing with her friends and singing the Gita Govinda. And Jagannath becomes so enamored by her singing that when the curtains close, he goes looking for the girl and he hides in the bushes listening to the Gita Govinda. And then at 4 o'clock when the curtains open again, the pujaris and the devotees find that Jagannath's come, but there are these thorny bushes where he has been spending his time, where the girl was singing the Gita Govinda. So his dhoti is torn in many different places. So they go to the king, and they go to a very famous king who's also in the pastimes. The king of Puri was in the pastimes of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. What was the name of the king? Anybody knows? What was the name of the king of Puri when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was around? Just like King Lakshman Sen, who visits Jayadev Goswami disguised as a common person, this king also had to go disguised as a common person to get darshan of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Anybody know his name? Very good. King Prataparudra, that glorious king, was the king of Puri that time. When it was reported to him that Jagannath's dhoti is torn in different places, he launches, he says, this is a serious offense, and he launches an investigation and tells the pujari, you let me know within 24 hours how this has happened. Otherwise, let's just say the king will not be very pleased. But that night in his dream, in King Prataparudra's dream, Jagannath himself appears and says, what, I went to listen to my devotee singing Gita Govinda in the bushes. If I go to play around and a part of my dhoti is torn, it's your pujari's job to replace it. So why are you punishing them? Let them do what they want. So when Prataparudra Maharaj, he has this dream, the next day he comes up with his own decree. So he comes up with a policy paper or a decree, and luckily we have access to the copy of the decree. In that decree he writes that to all the citizens of Jagannath Puri, from today onwards, because he realizes, King Prataparudra, that looks like the Gita Govinda is very dear to Lord Jagannath. So he says, to all the citizens of Jagannath Puri, from now on, all the performances of song and dance for Jagannath, Baldev and Lady Subhadra will consist from now on solely from Gita Govinda and no other work. Performers are therefore instructed to learn these songs of Gita Govinda exclusively. 4 musicians will accompany the dancers who dance to the Gita Govinda in front of the deities, and others may follow in chorus of singing. Temple officials who allow any other song to be performed in front of the deities shall be deemed enemies of Jagannath. So Maharaj Prataparudra ki, what a Rajarishi. So from that day onwards till today, or from all these centuries, the Gita Govinda is exclusively performed both in poetry as well as in dance and art form for the pleasure of Jagannath. So how many of you are thinking of going to Jagannath Puri this year? How many of you would like to go to Jagannath Puri at some stage? Well, I think you should make those plans pretty quickly. There are other contemporary poets who also recognize Jayadev Goswami's. Since we are getting a lot of devotees, if I can request you all to come a bit forward, because otherwise, just to make space for the devotees at the back. So the other poets in that time also recognized Jayadev Goswami as being one of the foremost Vaishnava poets. And one of them was a devotee called Vaishnav Das. And he actually wrote a series of poems glorifying Jayadev Goswami and some other Vaishnava poets of the time. So he writes, Jai Jayadeva Kabi Raghupati Shiromani Vidyapati Rasadham Jai Jai Chandi Das Ras Shekhar Akhila Bhuvane Anupam. So this is just a portion of what he writes, but effectively the translation is, he writes, all glories to Sri Jayadev, the crest jewel amongst poetic kings. All glories to Vidyapati, the abode of rasa. All glories to Sri Chandi Das, the greatest connoisseur of rasa. These poets are unparalleled in their excellence in the 3 worlds. The creation of these poets were pristine songs describing Madhurya Ras. These songs were written in prose and verse, and they were relished by Lord Gaurasundar, along with Ramananda Roy and Swarup Damodar. When Rai Ramanand and Swarup Damodar desired to awaken a particular mood within the Lord, they would sing these songs. Hearing their singing, even wood and stone would melt. Such were the sweet pastimes of these 3 individuals. Those moods and emotions of Sri Radha, which were hidden from the masses in general, were demonstrated with great effort by my Lord Gaurasundar to one and all. Now that he has disappeared from external vision, these rasas do not touch my heart. Even on listening to these songs, Vaishnav Das simply laments and cries. And this is Vaishnav Das describing Jayadev Goswami and 2 other Vaishnava poets. Even in ISKCON, Jayadev Goswami he's mentioned in a number of commentaries of Srila Prabhupada. And the Shastric Commission in ISKCON quite recently came up with the Pranam Mantra for Jayadev Goswami. It was written by Sri Hari Parshad Prabhu, who's from the Shastric Committee. Would you like to hear the Pranam Mantra for Jayadev Goswami? And with this we'll conclude the class. So Hari Parshad Prabhu writes, he says, Padmavati Parayam Srimad Chaitanya Dvita Varmayam Padmavati Parayam Srimad Chaitanya Dvita Vamayam Gita Govinda Kardharam Jayadeva Kavim Namaha. So the translation is, to him who is dear to Padmavati, to him whose literature was greatly respected by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to the composer of Gita Govinda, to Sri Jayadev Kavi, we offer our obeisances. So, Srila Jayadev Goswami ki, श्री श्री पद्मावती देवी की जय, श्री श्री जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्रा मैया की जय, श्री श्री राधा गोपीनाथ की, श्रीला प्रभुपाद की जय. Any questions? We have 5 minutes. Any questions on the life and pastimes of Jayadev Goswami? No? Oh well. Which Sampradaya? He was part of the Madhav Sampradaya. Any other questions about Jayadev Goswami? Well, okay. If not, then in half an hour you'll be singing part of the Gita Govinda yourself when you sing the Narsimha Arti. Okay. Shri Shri Radha Gopinath ki.
नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामी इति नामिने. नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषा शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यादिशितारिणे. जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा. हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे.
Hare Krishna, जय राधा